Imagine realizing that gravity isn't just some arbitrary rule you have to follow, but it's like the very fabric of the room you're standing in.
Right.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are exploring a framework from our sources that claims causality. You know, the simple reality of cause and effect operates exactly the same way.
Yeah, it's a massive concept.
It really is. Our mission today is to dig into a stack of sources that all orbit around this single mind-bending idea of if this, then this.
Which, sounds like basic programming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you've ever dabbled in computer coding or played with basic logic puzzles, you know that phrase. It's a command, a conditional rule.
Yeah.
But the argument we are unpacking today proposes something far more profound. It suggests that if this, then this is not merely a tool humans invented to organize information.
Right.
It is the actual native language of the universe. And understanding this, like really internalizing it, completely shifts how you navigate your life.
It fundamentally flips how we usually interpret our reality. Because, most of the time, we treat causality as a human coping mechanism.
Yeah, a way to make sense of the chaos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We look at a deeply unpredictable universe and we layer our own logic over it just to sleep at night. But when you look closely at the framework running through these sources, the premise is that we have it completely backwards.
How so?
Well, causality isn't a narrative we impose on existence. Causality is what existence actually does.
Mm-hmm.
Every single state of being is functioning simultaneously as an arrival and a departure.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that arrival and departure idea is where this goes from, abstract philosophy to something you can actually use on a Tuesday morning.
Right.
The idea that you have arrived at your current moment strictly because of a prior condition, that's the if.
Yes.
And this exact moment is now the departure point, the new condition for whatever happens next.
Which means consequence follows condition absolutely,
Yeah.
without exception.
Even when we can't see it.
Even when those consequences are completely invisible to us.
Yeah.
Or delayed by decades, or, happening entirely within the confines of our own minds. There are no skipped steps in the physics of reality.
Yeah.
Nothing causes nothing.
But I want to pause here and ground this, because when we start talking about the absolute physics of reality, it can sound a bit academic.
Sure.
Let's look at a really mundane example to see how this mechanism actually works for you in daily life. Say your alarm goes off and you hit the snooze button 3 times. That is the if.
And this isn't just that you wake up 20 minutes later.
All right.
This is a cascading physiological reality.
Right.
By disrupting that sleep cycle repeatedly, your brain releases a different cocktail of stress hormones.
Oh, wow.
So you wake up with a heightened level of cortisol. And now, that heightened cortisol is the new if.
Right. And because of that new if, you snap at your partner while making coffee. The snap is the this, which immediately becomes the if for your partner's mood. And suddenly, your entire morning is governed by a causal chain that started with a plastic button on your nightstand.
That is the exact mechanism.
Yeah.
But it's crucial to distinguish this from the cultural baggage we carry around ideas like fate or destiny.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because honestly, hearing that every single thing is locked into an endless chain of cause and effect, that I am just a domino falling because the domino behind me fell, that sounds exhausting.
It does sound like a trap.
Yeah. Let me play devil's advocate here. Doesn't this framework ultimately argue that our lives are completely pre-programmed? Like, where is human free will if everything is just blunt determinism?
What's fascinating here is that when you really drill down into the mechanics of if this, then this, it is infinitely more alive and responsive than determinism.
Okay, how so?
Well, determinism paints the universe as a mechanical clock wound up at the Big Bang, right? Just mindlessly ticking down. But this framework describes an active, constantly updating ecosystem. The illusion of determinism, or on the flip side, the illusion of pure randomness, usually just stems from our own cognitive limits.
So we just can't see the big picture.
Exactly. What we call random chance is almost always just a density of interacting if-then chains that are far too complex for our brains to map in real time.
Like watching weather patterns. A thunderstorm feels completely random when it ruins your picnic.
Right.
But it is actually the result of millions of atmospheric data points interacting with perfect, ruthless logic.
A perfect parallel. And it applies to the other extreme as well. What we casually call a miracle isn't a magical break in the laws of causality.
What is it then?
A miracle is simply an if-then chain that originated so far back in time, or in such an obscure place, that we have entirely forgotten we are standing inside as consequence.
We see the fruit dropping, but we never saw the seed being planted.
Exactly. And realizing this unlocks the most liberating aspect of this entire perspective. Conscious intervention is always mathematically possible.
Because you aren't trying to fight the entire universe to change your life. You don't have to somehow override reality.
You only have to change the if. The moment you alter the condition, the consequence must, by its very nature, alter.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that change doesn't require a monumental disruption. It can be incredibly subtle.
Like just taking a breath.
Yeah.
Huh.
If you change the quality of attention you bring to that morning argument with your partner, if you pause for a single second instead of snapping, you have introduced a new if. This must now be different.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if changing the condition alters the consequence, we have to look at the architecture of where these changes are actually taking place.
Right, the scales.
Yeah, the sources spend a lot of time mapping out what they call the fractal nature of consequence. So think of it like Russian nesting dolls or an operating system.
It's a good analogy.
You have a core piece of software, but it renders differently depending on the hardware. It runs on a smartwatch, a laptop, and a massive global server farm. The scale changes, but the underlying code, that if this, then this, is identical on every doll.
And that scales perfectly across the biological and psychological realities we experience.
Walk me through that.
So if we start at the microscopic level, the cellular scale, the code is biological. If a specific protein folds in a specific configuration, then a cascading chemical reaction is triggered.
Pure biological if-then.
Exactly. But then we scale up the hardware to the neurological level. If a specific pattern of synapses fires repeatedly in your brain, the physical resistance along that neural pathway decreases.
So the brain literally reshapes itself to make that thought easier to have next time.
Yes, it becomes the path of least resistance. That neurological this becomes what we observe as a behavioral habit or even a personality trait. But the code doesn't stop there. We scale up to the psychological level. If a foundational belief is held deeply enough, let's say the unconscious belief that the world is inherently hostile,
Okay.
then all incoming sensory data is filtered through the logic of that belief. The belief is the if, and the perception of a hostile interaction is the this.
Which instantly bleeds into the relational scale. Because if you are operating under the condition that the world is hostile, you bring a defensive energy into a room.
Absolutely.
And if you bring a defensive quality of presence to an encounter, the consequence is almost universally guaranteed, right? You'll provoke a defensive response from them.
You create the exact hostility you're afraid of.
Yeah.
And then the framework pushes us to look at the collective.
Yeah.
We scale up to the societal level. If a culture establishes a specific narrative about who belongs, who has value, and who does not,
That cultural if dictates a massive structural this.
precisely. It determines the distribution of resources, the zoning of neighborhoods, the statistics of life expectancy. The cultural narrative functions as the condition, and the societal structure is the inevitable consequence.
And what blows my mind is that these aren't separate, isolated systems. The cellular level isn't walled off from the societal level. They are constantly talking to each other.
They're deeply nested. A shift at the cellular level, like an illness, propagates up to alter your psychological state.
Right.
That fear alters your relational dynamics with your family, which ripples out into the collective. Now, the sources do emphasize this propagation isn't instantaneous or flawless.
There's some friction.
Right, there is lag, there's interference from millions of other overlapping causal chains, but the mechanics prove that what we often dismiss as mere inner work is never strictly personal.
Because it ripples outward.
Exactly. Changing an internal condition eventually ripples through the entire fractal system.
You know, if this fractal operating system is truly the baseline grammar of reality, it makes sense that humans didn't just suddenly discover this yesterday.
Definitely not.
Our ancestors must have noticed this pattern. They had to have built a vocabulary for it long before neuroscience. And when you look at ancient spiritual traditions, that is exactly what you find.
Yes.
They codified the physics of causality millennia ago.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it becomes clear that every major contemplative tradition is, at its core, a highly refined map of this exact architecture.
Like Buddhism.
Yes, take the Buddhist doctrine of dependent origination. It is arguably one of the most rigorous articulations of if this, then this ever developed.
Pratitya Samutpada, right.
Exactly. It states explicitly that absolutely nothing exists independently. Everything arises strictly in dependence on prior conditions.
Which totally shifts how we view suffering. It's not a divine punishment.
Not at all. It is a diagnostic mechanism. The formula is literally taught as, when this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises.
So it's just cause and effect.
Yes. Suffering happens because of specific conditions like attachment or ignorance, and the entirety of the Eightfold Path is not a set of moral commandments.
Right. It's not a list of sins.
It is a practical troubleshooting guide on how to dismantle the if, so the this of suffering ceases to arise.
I see a very similar mechanism when the sources dive into the Vedic concept of karma. I think so many of us in the West grew up with this almost Santa Claus version of karma.
Yeah, the cosmic ledger.
Exactly. We treat it like a cosmic courtroom where an invisible judge is keeping track of your good and bad deeds, ready to punish or reward you.
And that moralizing framework entirely strips away the mechanical brilliance of the original concept.
It really does.
Yeah.
The analogy that clarified this for me was thinking of karma not as a courtroom, but as an ecological compost bin.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. The universe is endlessly composting itself. Every action you take, every thought you entertain is an if that gets tossed into the compost. It breaks down and literally becomes the specific nutritional condition for whatever is going to grow next in your life. It's not about morality. It's pure agriculture. You plant corn, you get corn. You plant poison ivy, you get poison ivy.
We see a beautifully nuanced version of this in Yoruba cosmology as well, particularly regarding the concept of Ori.
Ori translates to the inner head, right?
Yeah.
Or one's personal destiny.
Exactly.
I was hoping we could dig into that because destiny usually implies something you can't escape. How does that fit into a causal framework where we supposedly have agency?
Because in the Yoruba framework, Ori is not a fixed, inescapable script that you are forced to act out. It functions as a living agreement between your higher self and the cosmic field.
A living agreement.
Yes. Think of it as a sacred if-then architecture. You have a unique alignment, a specific potential. If you align your daily actions and ethical choices with that inner agreement, specific pathways of consequence open up.
And if you don't?
If you act in misalignment, different consequences unfold. It requires constant consultation and dynamic interaction.
So it requires you to actively participate in your own causality.
Exactly.
Which brings up a very sharp, uncomfortable friction point in this whole discussion.
I think I know where you're going with it.
Well, if all these traditions map this out so elegantly, why do we constantly misapply it today? Because, let's be honest, if you tell someone today that their inner state directly dictates their outer reality,
It can get very dark very quickly.
yes, it takes about 5 seconds for that to devolve into some really dangerous territory.
This raises an important question, and it is the most critical juncture in the material we are reviewing. Because a framework this powerful, when stripped of its nuance, easily becomes a weapon.
Exactly my concern.
Yeah.
It sounds dangerously close to toxic prosperity theology.
Right.
The idea where we tell someone who is bankrupt or severely ill, well, you just didn't manifest hard enough, or your low vibration thoughts caused your cancer.
It's terrible.
It crosses the line into cruel victim blaming. If everything is cause and effect, aren't we just blaming people for the terrible things that happen to them?
We are, and it is a severe misapplication of the physics. The sources outline how we fall into these traps, primarily through something called selective application.
What does that mean?
This happens when people use the if-then principle to explain away the suffering of marginalized groups, but conveniently exempt their own privilege from the same scrutiny.
The classic, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps, why can't you?
Yeah.
Mentality.
Yes. They look at their financial success and say, my hard work was the if, and my wealth is the this,
Yeah.
which is partially true.
But they're ignoring the rest of the equation.
Exactly. They selectively ignore the massive systemic ifs they inherited, like generational wealth, or a zip code with well-funded schools, or a lack of discriminatory redlining.
Wow.
The true physics of if this, then this operates impersonally. It applies just as strictly to sweeping historical forces and ancestral traumas as it does to your personal morning routine.
So you can't claim all the credit.
You cannot claim total agency for your success while denying the reality of the historical conditions that were handed to you.
That makes a lot of sense. You are operating within a larger causal chain that you didn't build.
Precisely.
What are the other traps? Because I know I struggle with expecting things to change overnight once I make a good decision.
Well, that is the trap of temporal compression.
Temporal compression.
Yeah. It is our distinctly modern impatience colliding with the deep time of causality. We expect the consequence to follow instantaneously from the condition.
Like immediate gratification.
Exactly. You start setting healthy boundaries with a toxic family member, and when your entire family dynamic doesn't magically heal by the following weekend, you assume the framework is broken.
You think changing the if didn't work.
Right. But causality has its own gestation period. You can't plant a seed in January and then scream at the dirt when you don't have a tomato in February.
I love that. The timing of the consequence is part of the mechanism.
And failing to understand that leads directly to the most painful trap, the attribution error.
What's that one?
This is the false, often arrogant assumption that just because a tragic event occurred, a terrible personal if must have directly caused it.
Meaning if someone gets hit by a drunk driver, our brains want to find the cosmic reason why they, attracted that event, just so we can feel safe and in control.
Exactly. We desperately want the universe to be a neat, moral ledger. But the framework offers a much more rigorous clarification. It reminds us that we do not exist in a vacuum.
Right.
Sometimes the profound suffering you experience is not the consequence of your own choices. Sometimes it is the violent consequence of other people's if-then chains.
That is so important to hear.
Their unhealed patterns, their addictions, the corrupt systems they uphold, those chains carry momentum, and they can land in your life as a completely unearned condition. You are embedded in the causal chains of everyone around you.
You are both a cause and a consequence. That distinction is so vital because it completely removes the shame.
Yes, it does.
You cannot control every if that the world throws at you. But, and this is where we pivot to the practical application, you can absolutely observe what this follows from what if in your own reaction to those events.
Which is how you begin to actually work with the material of reality rather than just surviving it.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Having cleared away the traps of victim blaming and magical thinking, how do we use this as a tool for living?
Well, there's a great metaphor in the text.
Yeah, the one about wood. Reality has a grain to it, much like a piece of timber.
Right.
If you have ever tried woodworking, you know that if you work with the grain, the wood opens up, it is smooth, and the tool glides. But if you arrogantly try to force your tool against the natural grain, the wood splinters, the tool dulls, and you ruin the piece.
And that physical grain is the causal architecture we've been discussing. Working with the grain is the ultimate creative practice.
How does that apply creatively?
Whether you are an artist staring at a blank canvas, an entrepreneur building a system, or just a parent trying to raise a resilient child, you are engaging with the physics of consequence.
Give me an example.
Take the act of writing. If you show up to the desk every single day, regardless of inspiration, your mind's structural relationship to the work changes.
Ah, the neurological path of least resistance we talked about earlier.
Yes. You don't suddenly get a creative breakthrough because a cosmic judge decided to reward your moral effort. You get a breakthrough because the repeated condition of your focused attention mechanically alters the capability of your brain.
It's the physics of showing up. But it also applies to the emotional quality of what you are making, right?
Absolutely.
The sources argue heavily that if you tell the actual unflinching emotional truth in your work, even if it scares you, it will resonate with strangers.
Always.
I think about listening to a piece of music written decades ago by someone who lived a completely different life, and yet it brings you to tears in your car. That isn't magic.
No, it's not.
It's transmission. The artist planted a very specific condition, an if, of profound emotional honesty, and this is the resonance vibrating in your chest 50 years later.
Because ultimately, if this then this is a framework about the physics of resonance. It demands that we understand that our actions, the quality of our honesty, and the depth of our presence are constantly sending frequencies out into the fractal structure of reality.
And reality responds.
It has to. That structure, by its very nature, must respond.
It responds because it can't do anything else. It is an incredibly empowering place to land and a perfect place to synthesize the journey we've taken today.
Definitely.
What this deep dive reveals is that reality is not a neutral, empty vacuum where random events just bounce around and assault you. Reality is deeply, intricately, and beautifully structured.
Yes.
And because it is structured, your actions matter, your internal thoughts, your external boundaries, your relational presence. They are never just nothing.
Right, they never vanish.
They never vanish into the void. They always inevitably create a this.
Which means wisdom, whether found in ancient Yoruba cosmology or modern neurobiology, is never about acquiring magical powers to bypass the rules.
No exceptions.
Right. Wisdom is simply the precision of seeing the rules clearly. It is moving from being an unconscious, reactive participant in causality to becoming a conscious, deliberate co-creator within it.
You learn to read the grain of the wood.
Exactly.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you step back into your day. We spent a lot of time discussing how we are constantly embedded in other people's if-then chains, and how their unresolved actions can land violently in our lives.
Yeah, that's the attribution error piece.
Exactly, but remember, the reverse is equally true. Think about the interactions you're going to have in the next few hours with your family, with a coworker, or just the person bagging your groceries. What kind of condition are you inadvertently acting as in the lives of those people? When your causal chain intersects with theirs, are you handing them an if that is going to make their day splinter? Or are you handing them an if that will help them grow?
That's a great question to sit with.
Because gravity isn't a rule you have to follow, it's the fabric of the room you're standing in. The only question is, how are you going to move within it? Keep questioning the ifs, and we'll see you next time.